So today is the 8th anniversary of 9/11. And with all of the things that are going on, the services that were held both at Ground Zero and also at the Pentagon today and across the country, and a lot of people are certainly feeling threatened because of our way of life, and the minds of many of us are being threatened not only from external enemies but also internal enemies, and that turmoil continues. But I'm wondering, there are more foundational questions that a lot of people are asking with regards to why even evil? I mean, if there's a good and loving, all-powerful God, why would he not stop horrible, horrific things like 9/11? Where was God on the morning of 9/11? And then here it is 8 years later. Lest we forget, let's remember that there are still enemies that are plotting the same kinds of actions against us right now. And it's through the diligence and often the life sacrifices of many that are in the emergency response teams and law enforcement and in the military who are keeping us safe, to question whether or not will we ever be attacked again. Remember back to the time right after 9/11. We all thought another attack was imminent. It's now been 8 years, and we've not had an attack on American soil, although there have been a number of attempts and plots that have been thwarted. Joining us right now is my favorite, Dallas Willard. This is the man that has had the biggest impact on my spiritual life. I tell you guys that all the time. If you've never read The Divine Conspiracy, or if you're not familiar with it, it is the book I would encourage you to read, the number one book with regards to the Christian life. It's profoundly impacted all of my thinking and my walk with the Lord in dramatic ways. He is out with a new book entitled Knowing Christ Today, Why We Can Trust Spiritual Knowledge, and of course that's available everywhere. Plus there are wonderful resources that Dallas has at his website, including a whole bunch of audio files, and you can listen to Dallas teaching all across the country, and that's at dwillard.org, and of course I'll link to that. So Dallas Willard, welcome back. Let me ask you about the evil question. Where was God on the morning of 9/11? I'm sure that you have wrestled with that question over the years, and people still ask that question. Where was God when evil is done? Where was God on 9/11, Dallas?
It's important not to give a kind of cavalier or simple answer for those who have suffered, because suffering is something that you have to take in full reality and not try to explain it away in some simple way. The suffering is real. Where was God? God is always where the suffering is. So those who are there and turn to him will find him. But that, I think, is not the real question that people ask, and that is, you have put it well, Frank, why does he allow evil? And the answer is because the world that contains the possibility of evil is the one that also contains the greatest possibility of good. And the question of why does he allow evil to happen has to be put against the question, what would a world be like where evil could not happen? And it's by working on those questions that people can come to some resolution in their mind about the reality of evil and what it means. If we don't examine the question carefully, then our response is a very human one, a very natural one, and completely understandable, which is just a great big no.
Right.
And that comes from the heart, and it's right. We should reject evil, and we should do everything we can to remove it from our lives and the lives of other people.
So Dallas, I'm sure you have addressed this question in all of the years that you have been teaching, not only at USC but in churches and in conferences. Yes. For decades. And so where do we start? I don't want this to be, and you know, God forbid, it would never happen with you to make it right, merely academic, but where do we start? I mean, how do we begin putting it together?
Yes, that's the right question. And where we start is with a realistic analysis or understanding of why those men flew those planes into the trade towers? Why did they do it? And now, that's where evil resides in the first approach. It's in the hearts of human beings. And if we want to think about what we can do about evil, that's where we want to go, is to changing the hearts of human beings, beginning with ourselves. And we have to accept the fact, which the modern world is very resistant to, and that is that we live in a world where sin triumphs over good. And it is the desire to harm people, to hurt people, that is the primary form that evil takes, whether it's in some bully on the schoolyard or someone leading a nation like Hitler, or wherever it is. It is always one thing, and that is the intent to harm people. And now, why is that there? Well, it's important to go into that. Anger is the primary source of the desire to hurt people. And anger comes from disappointment of one's desires. So right in the very back of this whole discussion is this fundamental fact that people want things they don't get, and they become angry and are ready to hurt other people. And then that can blow up into a national episode or into a cultural episode, which is what we're in now between basically Western people and Islam. The fundamental fact is anger, a hatred deriving out of the disappointment of desire.
Now, Dallas, going back one step on a more of a meta scale, in the minds of a lot of people is they believe that this Judeo-Christian God, if he's omnipotent, if he's all-powerful and he can do all things, why is there evil? And you had said earlier, because try to imagine a world in which evil was not possible. Talk about that a little bit, because I think that will help people understand that there is no other possible way that even God could have created a world where you would have free, loving people who would want to be in the fellowship of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and yet not have the opportunity for evil and rebellion.
Yes. When you first start thinking about it, you might think that a world which just had vegetables and minerals would be better than the one that has human beings in it. But I believe if you think more deeply about it, you'll understand the great value of what it is to have human beings with choice and the possibility of developing good character or going the other way and becoming bad people. It's that fundamental choice of what kind of universe are we thinking about. And, you know, when a person is hurting or looking at something like this terrible thing that we're talking about today, you might just well say, well, I'd rather have a universe that just had vegetables and minerals. But probably, if you think about it a bit, you realize that nearly everything of value that is in your life would be gone. And there wouldn't be any evil, but there also wouldn't be any good. And it's because of the great value of what is good in human life that a universe that allows for evil, but also responsibility for good, is much more valuable and desirable, even with the pain, than your universe that has only minerals and vegetables, for example, or nothing at all. I mean, that's another way you can go, well, they're just better that there would be nothing. Oh, really? And see, that's what you have to think through.
But God chose to create,
Yes.
and yet we're living in a world with, you know, the Inquisition and with what happened with the Jews in the Holocaust and just the evils every single day. Is it possible for God to have created a world with even less evil than we have?
Well, that's an important point to make about it. And, you know, one might think that, for example, if he had just prevented Hitler, that would have been a better world. But then you have to take the responsibility of saying, how would you set it up to prevent that?
Right.
There's always the thought that somehow you could just have God sort of sitting up there with a great big fly swatter, and whenever he sees something evil about to happen, he hits it. But what you get out of that is a world in which there is no order. There is no law. You cannot count on what's going to happen, because who knows when God is going to step in and swat something. And it's the existence of a world with an order and a moral order that is in question. And if you bring it down to the level of raising children or dealing with young people, I mean, you think about how it might be better to keep them from ever doing anything that is harmful.
Right.
But you realize, if you think about it, that if you do that, you'll destroy their life. That they have to choose, and they have to learn, and they have to grow. Now, there's always some measures you can take to help them with that, but actually I think God has provided that, Frank. And that's why we do have a Bible and a church and a conscience and all kinds of things, including the course of nature, that calls us to something better, but doesn't force it down our throat.
Dallas, when we come back, I'm going to ask you about the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, because Jesus goes to the heart of this when he's addressing the problem of anger.
Yes.
And you had said that all of these actions like 9/11 and all of the hatred and war and all that reduces down to anger of not getting our desires. And Jesus addresses that head on in the Sermon on the Mount.
Well, Jesus starts his discussion of life with the picture of the kingdom of God and the blessed life in that. And then he turns to street level and begins to look at where harm comes from in terms of individual lives. And the first thing he puts his finger on is anger and contempt. Now, if you pull anger and contempt out of the world, you don't have a 9/11. You don't have a Holocaust. You actually don't have an Inquisition, because without those things, you simply do not get the motivation to hurt other people. And it's important to remember that, because one way of thinking about evil is just to say, well, why doesn't God stop it? But the other question is, what am I going to do about it? And in order to deal with that, I have to start with me and whatever the range of my influence is. And of course, for some people, that's much broader than others, to help others come to grips with the place of anger in their lives. Anger comes from crossing the will, that is, interfering with someone's desires. And it's a natural response to get angry. You see it in children, you see it in all kinds of people, sports figures, politicians. It's always the same thing, crossing the will. And the general path of changing this is to say, in order to get rid of anger and contempt and to keep desire under control of what is good, you have to surrender your will to God. That is to say, you have to turn your future, your present, everything over to God's care. That is the answer to the problem of evil, even for those who have to go through it in ways like you mentioned, cancer or losing loved ones in the war or whatever it may be. It is surrender to the will of God. Now, one thing you want to say, if there's no God, there's no problem of evil. It's just, why not? If someone says, why evil? If there's no God, there's no question there. It's just, why shouldn't there be evil if there's no God?
Right.
And actually, that's a form of faith in God that raises the problem of evil. And what we have to do is take that little seed of faith, God must be somehow responsible for this, and turn it into a surrender to the will of God in the hope of his care and direction over this universe.
Now, Dallas, I'd like you to lay this out in a different angle here. If desire and my will is the root of where it begins to go awry because it's outside of the will of God, and then I get angry and name-calling and contempt and stuff, how will it work in heaven? I mean, will I be able to fulfill all of my desires, or does God somehow change my desires? What happens when I don't, quote, get what I want, you know?
You will not be troubled by it because your desires will be subjected to what is good. And see, in this world, the problem is that desire runs wild. Desire just says, I want that. And if I don't get it, I'm angry, and then I will start treating people with contempt, and all sorts of misbehaviors will come in. It's a matter of, let me put it this way, Frank. I've had people ask me when I'm lecturing on campuses, why doesn't God do evil? And the answer is very simple. He knows better. It's the same reason I don't stick this pin in my eye. It's because I know better. And in heaven, we will have grown to the place and be in a context where we will not ever feel threatened that we're going to miss out on something we want. And that will cut the string of anger. It's the context and the development of character. Now, those people who are going to be with God in heaven are certainly people who want to be there, and those will be people who love God, and they will have come to the place in their relationship to Him that they're quite content to not get what they want. And that's a shocking statement for most people today.
Right.
Because not getting what you want
doesn't sound like heaven.
Yeah, that's right. But it won't matter.
Right.
That's where we can increasingly grow here. And it's really tough if you're on the top floor of the Trade Center when it's collapsing or your loved one is there. And we never want to say anything to try to diminish the pain that people actually feel or explain that away. But we do want to say there's something beyond the pain. And for those who look to God and call upon Him and trust in Him, they can be sure that good will triumph in their lives.
Now, Dallas, this is terribly unfair. We only have about 2 minutes left. But our responsibility as Christians, and the way that which I've said it so many times, is it's not fire insurance. It's not you get to go to heaven when you die. You're invited to participate in your terminology, a divine conspiracy, where we're invited by God to work with Him against evil. And so talk to me about our responsibility when there is such injustice and evil exercise, such as at 9/11. How are we to respond to that? What are we to do?
The main thing we are to do is to follow Christ and invite others to follow Him. That is the practical thing that we can do. And get it out of the category of signing up for heaven when you die, because, you know, if you go that way, you might not even like it when you get there. But practice now living in the kingdom of God as a disciple of Jesus and using your life, your sphere of influence, in every way you can to advance what is good and loving and healthy. Really, anyone knows. Just do the things that are good and right and trust God.
There's a bunch of wonderful resources that's available at his website as well. That is dwillard.org, and hope you avail yourselves of the wonderful resources that are there. Dallas, thank you so much.